This is the tutorial for Chapter 12 in your Beginning AutoCAD workbook. Okay, in Chapter number 12, we're going to learn how to use a new command called offset to duplicate an object at a specified distance, how to make changes to an object's properties, and how to use the Quick Properties panel. Okay, so let's look at offset. So your book goes through a couple of different ways to do offset and a couple of the options. So let's just do a basic offset to begin with. So you could type in the command offset on your command line or come up to the modify panel, and this button is the one for your offset. So you can offset a distance offset an object at a specified distance or through a point. After you offset objects, you can trim and extend them just like other lines and curves. Okay, so let's pick offset. So our first thing on our command line says to specify a distance, or we have a couple of other options in there. We're going to leave those alone. Let's specify a distance first. I'm going to do 0.25. Then it says select your object. So I'm going to pick this line and then specify point on side to offset. So I can either offset it to the top or I can offset it to the bottom. And this was originally an object line, and I had just changed the colors of it for the display. I'm going to go back to my object line layer. So offset, our distance was 0.25, enter, select your object, and there. It was taking the properties before of the layer I had it set on, because last time I used this function I used the layer offset. So normally it'll do what it just did there. It keeps the same properties of the line that you're offsetting. Okay, let's do it again on this rectangle. So my rectangle, I changed the colors on it to show you that it's 4 separate pieces. I want to show you what happens to the corners when we do offsets. And I'm just going to use the same distance. So now when I go to do this, it doesn't increase your line. It makes an exact copy at a specified distance of what already exists. So then you'd have to go in and do extend and trim and all of that to get those to connect. However, if you had an actual rectangle and you did offset on it, 0.25 is my distance, it's going to keep it together. So same thing with circles. Let's look at a couple of the options. Okay, so I'm going to do offset. I'm going to keep my distance of 0.25, hit enter, select, and this time I'm going to click multiple. Before I do this, I'm going to go to my correct layer, fix my layers up here. It's just because I had changed everything for displaying it. Okay, offset 0.25, select my object, and M for multiple. So I can keep creating circles that are 0.25 apart without having to go back in and click the original one. Same thing I could do with lines, rectangles, whatever it is that I'm copying, as long as I select multiple. Okay, so that is offset. Remember when we did the rectangle and it had all those gaps? Your book shows you an exercise like this to use offset on. I did an offset on this of 0.25. I'm going to have that same sort of mess that I have to go back and trim everything afterwards. And I don't want to do that because that's just a waste of time. So I'm going to type a command in on my command line. I'm out of all my other commands right now. I'm going to type in join. I'm going to select the objects I want to join together. So they have to be touching. My lines have to be touching to start with. So now that's one solid object. If I wanted to do offset on that, I enter my distance, I select my object, and click which side I want it to offset to. So join will save you a bunch of time when you're doing offsets. Okay, so the next thing that they show us in chapter number 12 is working with properties. So if you select an object, I'm going to select my circle, I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to say properties. So I'm going to get a new dialog box open up here, my properties panel. So it shows the object that's selected, and then it gives me information about it. So general information, how it's displayed, and geometry about it. If I wanted to, I could go in here and type my diameter. I can make changes to certain, depending on what you have selected, you can change certain things about it. If I wanted to change the location of it as well, I can do it in there. And again, it'll depend what sort of an object you have selected. So here I have at the top, I have text selected. If I have a couple of different things selected, so I have a circle and I have text. So it'll say up here, okay, there's more than one thing selected and they're not the same type of objects. So all it's going to display is some general information or anything that is the same about them. Okay, so sometimes you might want to know the properties of something as you're working on it. There's something else called a quick properties panel. So I'm going to use my X to close the properties palette. Down on your status bar at the bottom where your object, snap, and ortho and everything is, we're going to go to the customization and make sure that you have quick properties. Oh, here it is down at the bottom. Quick properties turned on. So once you add that quick properties, it's going to add this little button down at the bottom for quick properties. So I'm going to turn that on. What that'll do is if I click on an object, it'll display some of the quick general properties about it. And again, I can make changes in there. Some people work with that turned on and just stuck over to the corner out of the way as they're working. I find it distracting, but it's up to you if you want to use it or not. Just an option so that you know that it is there. The last thing that they mention is something called offset gap. So for offset gap, I'm just going to draw what they have drawn, what they're working with. So something like that. So offset gap type. That's the actual command, offset gap type. Then you can enter values. You can have 0, 1, or 2. So if I have 0 and I do offset 0.25, enter. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It has to be, these already have to be joined together. So it could be a rectangle, it could be a polyline, something like that. I'm just going to use that join command on them and join those together. Now I'm going to show you the offset gap type. So at 0, all that it does It just offsets it the same as what we've seen before. If we have offset gap type set to 1, I'm going to do offset. I'm going to use 0.375 as my offset distance. Select my object to offset, and it's going to create a radius that's the same as my offset distance. So that radius is 0.375. And the last offset gap type setting is a 2. I could enter the value of 2 and go offset. This time I'm going to say a distance of 0.5. Select my object. Oh, and see, I'm learning something as we go along too here. It won't do it on one that already has a radius on it. Okay, so let's try it this way. Offset. So it says down here my gap type is set to 2. I'm going to go 0.125 because I'm going to go inside the smaller one this time. Okay, and I'm offsetting it. Now that's not what is supposed to happen. Oh, there it is. Okay, so my 0.125 distance was the problem. I'm going to show you this. Okay, offset. My offset gap type is set to 2. I'm going to put my distance to 0.25. The problem, actually no, I'll leave it at 0.125 to show you what the problem was. So if I try to put one on the inside with that setting, it's just going to look regular. If I take it this time and move it out, since I have my offset gap set to 2, it's putting a chamfer or an angle on my part, on my corner for me, instead of a radius. Okay, so I'm going to set my offset gap type back to the default of 0 because I'm doing that every time I'm working on stuff. Okay, so that is offset, join, properties, quick properties, and offset gap type. Okay, so you're going to use that stuff to work on exercise 12D. That's the end of the tutorial for chapter 10 in your workbook.